5 wannabe operators thought they'd found an easy target, a quiet contractor who wore her uniform like she still belonged. So they cornered her at the fire pit, stripped the navy blouse right off her back, and threw it into the flames, watching her trident patch curl up and burn. That's what happens to fake warriors, one of them laughed. But the next morning, when that black SUV pulled up to the loading dock, they realized they'd made a mistake, because she didn't come back in civilian clothes. She came back in full SEAL combat gear, and this time, she wasn't walking away. Before we show you what happened when 5 failures tried to break a real operator, hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Because this story starts with disrespect, but it ends with a lesson nobody will ever forget. The heat was already brutal at 0730, even for the Gulf Coast in September. Naval Logistics Facility 7B sat baking under a sun that hadn't learned mercy. Concrete radiating waves of heat that made the air shimmer like water. Forklifts beeped their way between shipping containers. Salt air mixing with diesel fumes. And the smell of rubber that had been cooked too long on hot asphalt. Lieutenant Commander Adrienne Cole moved through it all, like the heat was just another mission parameter. She wore her service uniform, the real deal. Pressed navy blouse, regulation trousers, desert boots that had walked more miles than most people drove in a year. The insignia above her left breast read clear as daylight, LTCMDR, A. Cole, Navy SEAL. Most people assumed she had no business wearing it anymore. They were wrong. Adrienne was on medical reassignment, that gray zone between active duty and retirement where the Navy tries to figure out if you're broken for good or just dented. Her orders came from 2 echelons above the base commander. Nobody with sense questioned those kinds of orders. But sense wasn't exactly common among the junior personnel. She limped slightly, favoring her left side where shrapnel had torn through her during a convoy attack in Kandahar 18 months back. The doctors said she was lucky. The metal missed her spine by millimeters. The brass said she was done. Adrienne kept showing up in uniform anyway. Not because she was clinging to the past, because technically she was still Navy, still a SEAL, still serving, even if that service looked different now. The older chiefs and warrant officers got it. They'd nod when she passed, maybe ask how the supply audit was going. Professional respect, nothing flashy. Master Chief Rodriguez had been the first to figure it out. 32 years in the Navy, and he'd learned to read people the way others read newspapers. The morning he'd watched Adrienne field strip an M4 with her eyes closed, muscle memory from weapons training that went deeper than any logistics course, he'd quietly pulled her personnel jacket. What he found made him whistle low under his breath. Operation Tide Glass wasn't in the public record. Most people had never heard of it. But Rodriguez remembered the classified brief that had circulated through senior leadership 2 years back. 11 hostages extracted from a compound in Somalia. 3 SEALs pulled out under fire. 1 female operator who'd taken shrapnel to the chest and kept fighting. He never said anything to Adrienne about it, just started making sure she had the equipment she needed and the space to work without interruption. But the younger guys, they saw something entirely different when they looked at her. They saw a woman in her 30s wearing a trident she couldn't possibly have earned, walking around like she owned the place. To them, she was either stolen valor or a reminder of everything they'd never become. Both options made them angry. The worst of them called themselves the 5%ers, like it was something to be proud of. Marcus Flynn was their unofficial leader. 24 years old, with the kind of jaw that made recruiters salivate. He'd lasted 10 days in buds before stress fractures sent him home with a medical drop and a chip on his shoulder the size of a destroyer. He still posted about it on social media, like it had happened yesterday instead of 2 years ago. Jared Thompson, JT to anyone who'd listen, had washed out of air rescue after 3 weeks. Too slow, too reckless, too undisciplined. But according to JT, someone had sabotaged his dive pack. Always someone else's fault. Derek Ballard never even made it that far. He'd gotten flagged for behavioral concerns during SEAL orientation, the pre-prep program they ran to weed out obvious problems. Since then, he'd bounced through 4 assignments, each one worse than the last. Luke Carver was the baby of the group, A reservist on active orders who talked about his future SEAL career like it was inevitable instead of impossible. He said things like, "when I deploy," and "once I'm on the teams," with the confidence of someone who'd never been tested. And then there was Devin Rusk, a civilian contractor whose claim to military knowledge came from having a cousin who'd been a Marine sniper. He acted like that gave him license to critique everything from combat tactics to uniform regulations. Together, they were a closed loop of failure and resentment. They watched Adrienne from across the yard, whispered when she walked past, took blurry photos, and shared them with captions like, "Stolen Valor Barbie strikes again." What really ate at them wasn't that she might be faking. It was the growing suspicion that she wasn't, the way older officers deferred to her, how she handled weapons like muscle memory, the controlled way she moved through the facility, always aware of exits, always positioning herself with clear sightlines. Most telling was how she ran, not just the 5-minute miles, but the route variations, the tactical breathing, the way she'd pause at certain points along the perimeter fence like she was conducting reconnaissance instead of just exercising. Flynn had been watching long enough to recognize the signs, which made it worse. Because if Adrienne Cole really was everything they'd failed to become, then her quiet presence became a daily reminder of their inadequacy. And that was something they couldn't tolerate. The confrontation started small, the way these things always do. Flynn and JT caught her in the supply cage one afternoon, pretending to need something from the tool locker while she inventoried night vision equipment. "Damn," Flynn said, loud enough to carry. "Look how she handles that gear." Like she's actually used it before. Adrienne didn't look up from the PVS-14 as she was cataloging. "Maybe she's been practicing," JT added with a smirk. "You know, for when she gets her first real deployment." They laughed like it was hilarious. Adrienne set down her clipboard and met Flynn's eyes directly. "You need something, or are you just here to waste my time?" "Just being friendly," Flynn said, stepping closer. "Most people around here appreciate that." "I'm working." "Yeah, I can see that. Real important work, counting toys." She went back to her inventory. The dismissal was quiet, but complete. Flynn felt his jaw tighten. Back home, when he talked, people listened. Here, this contractor acted like he was invisible. "You know," he said, "it wouldn't kill you to be social once in a while." Adrienne finished marking her sheet, packed the equipment back into its case, and walked toward the exit. As she passed Flynn, he called out, "This attitude of yours is going to catch up with you." She stopped, turned back, looked at him for a long moment. "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice." Adrienne studied his face, then JT's, memorizing details the way she'd been trained to assess potential threats. "Thanks for the input," she said finally. "I'll file it appropriately." She left them standing there, but Flynn caught the message. File 13, the trash can. That's when he knew they had a real problem. Over the next week, they tested her boundaries with increasing boldness. Tuesday morning, Rusk accidentally knocked over a stack of ammunition crates near her workstation. The sound echoed through the supply bay like thunder. Adrienne looked up from her inventory sheet, assessed the scattered boxes, then quietly began restacking them without a word. "Sorry about that," Rusk called out, not bothering to help. "Didn't see you there." Wednesday, Ballard stationed himself near the equipment cage while she worked, making comments just loud enough to carry about contractors who don't know their place and civilians playing dress-up. When she passed him carrying a case of optics, he stepped sideways, forcing her to navigate around him. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Oh, sure," he replied with exaggerated courtesy. "Anything for our decorated hero." Thursday was worse. Carver started showing up wherever she was working, asking loud questions about gear he had no business touching. He'd pick up rifle scopes, handle night vision equipment, even reached for her clipboard once before she moved it out of range. "What's this one do?" he'd ask, waving around a piece of equipment worth more than his annual salary. "Put it down," she'd respond calmly. "Just looking. This is what real operators use, right?" Each incident was recorded in her mental file, not for revenge, for documentation. If this escalated to official channels, she'd need specifics. By Friday, they'd grown confident enough to work in pairs. Flynn and JT cornered her near the loading dock during her afternoon inspection route. "You know," Flynn said, leaning against a cargo container, "most people who've been where you claim to have been, they like to talk about it." Adrian continued checking serial numbers on her list. "Is that right?" "Yeah, war stories, combat experiences, the Brotherhood and all that." JT moved to block her most direct exit route. "But you? Nothing. Like maybe there's nothing to talk about." She looked up from her clipboard, studied both of them for a moment, then went back to work. "Strong, silent type, huh?" Flynn pressed. "Or just scared someone might ask the wrong questions." That evening, Master Chief Rodriguez found her in the supply office, finishing her weekly reports under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Commander," he said, closing the door behind him. "Master Chief, those boys been giving you trouble?" She looked up from her paperwork. Rodriguez's weathered face showed genuine concern. "Nothing I can't handle, I'm sure. But sometimes handling things quietly just makes them think they can push harder." Adrienne set down her pen. "You got something specific you want to say, Master Chief?" "I pulled some duty rosters. Those 5 have been coordinating their schedules to cross paths with you. That's not coincidence." She nodded. She'd noticed it too. "My advice? Document everything, and maybe start varying your routine. Guys like that, they get emboldened when they think they've figured out your pattern." It was good advice. Professional advice from someone who'd seen this kind of situation before. But Adrienne had already decided on a different approach. She was going to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. One chance to prove their theories, which made them bolder. The real confrontation happened in the vehicle maintenance bay. Adrienne was inventorying transferred equipment, night vision gear that had been moved from the armory for inspection. The bay was mostly empty except for a couple mechanics working on a Humvee 2 bays over. That's when all 5 of them showed up. "Well, well," Flynn said, his voice echoing off the concrete. "Look who's branching out." Adrienne glanced up from the PVS-14 as she was checking. "Bay's closed for inventory." "Good thing we're not here for maintenance," JT said, positioning himself near the entrance. The mechanics looked up from their work, sensing trouble. A staff sergeant with grease-stained coveralls started to approach, but Flynn waved him off. "We're good here, Sergeant, just talking to the contractor." The staff sergeant hesitated, looked at Adrienne, then back at the 5 men whose body language screamed confrontation. But Adrienne gave him a slight nod, a gesture that said she could handle it. He returned to his work but kept watching. Rusk circled around behind her while she worked. "You know, we've been wondering about you." "Nothing to wonder about." Ballard leaned against the tool cart. "See, that's where you're wrong. Everyone has a story. Everyone talks, except you." Adrienne continued marking items on her checklist, but now she was tracking all 5 of them. Positions, movements, potential improvised weapons within reach. The bay had decent sightlines, but limited exits. Not ideal, but workable. "Maybe she's hiding something," JT suggested. "Maybe she just doesn't like you," Adrienne said without looking up. Carver laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's not very friendly." "I'm not here to be your friend." Flynn stepped closer, close enough that she had to acknowledge him. "You know what I think? I think you're not what you pretend to be." Adrienne set down her pen and looked at him. "What do you think I'm pretending to be?" "Some badass operator with a classified background, but really, you're just another civilian who couldn't hack it." The mechanics had stopped working entirely now. The staff sergeant's hand rested on his radio. Adrienne looked at each of the 5 men, her expression calm but measuring. When she spoke, her voice carried an edge they hadn't heard before. "You need to leave. Now." "Or what?" Flynn challenged. Adrienne didn't answer. She simply gathered her equipment and started walking toward the exit. They let her go, this time. But as she passed Flynn, he called out, "This isn't over!" Adrienne stopped, turned back, met his eyes directly. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It is." The staff sergeant watched her leave, then keyed his radio to call the duty desk. Some situations needed documentation before they exploded, but documentation wasn't going to stop what was already in motion. They picked their moment perfectly. Friday night, fire pit night, At the edge of the base near the north fence line, there was a gravel clearing where junior personnel went to blow off steam. Music from phone speakers, cheap beer and solo cups, flames licking up from metal barrels filled with scrap wood and cardboard. Command tolerated it because contained stupidity was better than the alternative. Adrienne almost never went. But that evening, she'd stop by to return a misplaced equipment case someone had left near the loading dock. It was already past 2100, the sun long gone, security lights casting everything in harsh yellow. She wore her service uniform as always, pressed navy blouse, clean trident patch catching the firelight. She dropped the case near a picnic table and turned to leave. "Hey, Lieutenant Commander!" The voice dripped mockery. She turned. All 5 of them stepped out of the shadows, Flynn in the lead, the others spreading out like they'd practiced it. "Didn't expect you out here," Flynn said. "Figured you were too important for the rest of us." Adrienne adjusted the strap on her shoulder bag, but didn't respond. "That uniform," JT said, pointing at her chest. "You always wear it, even off duty? Isn't that kind of inappropriate for civilians?" Carver added, his voice full of fake concern. She could smell alcohol on them now, liquid courage. "Tell you what," Flynn said, taking another step closer. "Let's settle this right now. You take off that shirt, toss it in the fire, and we all move on. No harm, no foul." "No," she said simply. Flynn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You sure about that?" She stepped back slightly, squaring her shoulders, calculating distances and exit routes. That's when Ballard moved. He lunged fast and sloppy, grabbing the shoulder seam of her uniform blouse. The fabric tore with a sharp, ripping sound. Adrienne's hand came up. Instinctive, trained, but she didn't strike. Not yet. JT grabbed her other arm. Carver shoved her from behind. In seconds, they'd wrestled the shirt off her back, torn and wrinkled, but still recognizable. Flynn held it up like a trophy. The others cheered. Then, without ceremony, he flung it into the bonfire. The flames caught immediately. The fabric curled and blackened. The trident patch twisted into an unrecognizable lump of melted thread and metal. For a long moment, no one said anything. Adrienne stood there in her tan undershirt, breathing steady and controlled. Her gaze swept over each of them, memorizing faces, cataloging threats, filing away details for later. No fear, no anger, just cold calculation. Then she turned and walked away. No words, no threats, no looking back. Flynn chuckled to break the silence. "Guess that settles that." But nobody laughed with him this time. Something in the way she'd walked away, not defeated but purposeful, made them uneasy. They didn't know that as she disappeared into the darkness, she was already reaching for her phone. They didn't know about the text message she sent to a number with a 757 area code. They didn't know that burning her uniform hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning. The black SUV arrived at 0600. Most of the base was still shaking off sleep. Diesel engines coughing to life, forklifts backing out of their bays, clipboard rotations beginning their morning dance. The early crew was focused on their routines, too tired to notice much. But when the SUV door opened, everything changed. Adrienne Cole stepped out in full combat gear. Tactical plate carrier over a moisture-wicking navy shirt, desert pattern trousers tucked into hardened boots, sidearm holstered at her thigh, Kevlar helmet clipped to her belt, a subdued Navy Special Warfare trident sewn onto her chest rig, worn and faded from actual use, not fresh from the uniform shop. No announcement, no fanfare. She just started walking. Same route she took every morning across the lot toward the supply hangar, except this time the clipboard was gone. In its place, a sealed aluminum case handcuffed to her left wrist. One by one, heads turned. Forklift drivers slowed to a crawl. Petty officers checking manifests looked up and forgot what they were doing. Even the security guard at the main gate came out of his booth to watch her pass. She didn't speak to anyone. Didn't even glance toward the fire pit area where 5 men were already awake, trying to pretend the previous night had been a bad dream. But they saw her. Flynn nearly choked on his instant coffee. JT whispered something that sounded like profanity. Ballard just stared, his mouth hanging open. Because this wasn't dress up. This wasn't borrowed gear or costume party nonsense. She moved like she'd been born wearing it. Every piece of equipment positioned exactly right. Every strap adjusted for immediate access. The helmet bounced slightly as she walked, but it was secured with the casual competence of someone who'd worn one through actual combat. And then, almost as an afterthought, a second vehicle pulled into the lot. Military-issue SUV with government plates. The door opened and out stepped a SEAL commander in dress blues, silver eagles gleaming in the morning sun. He didn't follow Adrienne, just stood there talking quietly to the base XO, who had appeared from the admin building with a stack of folders under his arm. It was coordinated, planned, official, not revenge, an operation. Adriana disappeared into the supply hangar with her case. The forklifts resumed their routes, but the whispers had already started. By 0700, every person on that base knew something fundamental had shifted. Because when you burn someone's uniform and expect them to stay quiet, you're gambling on their weakness. But Adrienne Cole hadn't returned to show weakness. She'd returned to show strength. The confrontation happened at 0915. The base was deep into its morning routine. Gear checks, inventory updates, equipment transfers between hangars. Adrienne had finished her briefing with the SEAL commander and was heading to Hangar 4 for a classified audit when she found them waiting. All five, positioned around the rear entrance to the equipment cage like they'd been planning this moment all night. Flynn stepped forward first. "We need to talk." Adrienne stopped walking but didn't answer. "You can't just show up in stolen gear and think that changes anything," JT said, his voice shaking with anger or fear or both. "This is harassment," Ballard added. "You're trying to intimidate us." Adrienne looked at each of them in turn, then reached for her radio. Rusk knocked it out of her hand before she could key the mic. That was the moment everything went from stupid to criminal. "No backup this time," Flynn said. "No commanders, no witnesses, just us." The equipment cage was perfect for their purposes. Isolated, no cameras, surrounded by tall shelving units that blocked sightlines from the main yard. A steel-walled box with one exit. They thought they had her trapped. They were wrong. Flynn made the first move. A clumsy rush meant to tackle her against the shelving. Adrienne sidestepped, grabbed his tactical vest, and used his momentum to slam him face first into a metal support beam. He dropped like someone had cut his strings. Ballard came next, swinging wild haymakers that might have worked in a bar fight but were useless here. Adrienne caught his wrist mid-punch, twisted into a joint lock that made something pop audibly, and dropped him to his knees with a scream of pain. Rusk had grabbed a tie-down chain from one of the shelves, swinging it like a medieval flail. Adrienne ducked under the first swing, stepped inside his reach, and swept his legs out from under him. His head bounced off the concrete with a sickening thud. Carver tried to blindside her from the right, but she'd been tracking him the whole time. A forearm block redirected his punch. A knee to the solar plexus doubled him over, and a controlled takedown sent him sprawling across a pile of cargo netting. JT was already running for the door when it opened from the outside. The SEAL commander stood there with his arms folded, flanked by the base XO and two military police officers. Behind them, a small crowd of senior NCOs who'd heard the commotion. Adrienne stood in the center of the cage, breathing steady, not a mark on her. Around her, 5 men groaned and writhed on the concrete floor like broken toys. "Lieutenant Commander Cole," the commander said calmly. "Situation report. 5 subjects attempted unlawful detention and assault, sir. I responded with minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat." Rusk tried to sit up, blood trickling from a cut on his scalp. That was minimum force? Adrienne looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "Son, if I'd used maximum force, we'd be having a very different conversation." The base XO was already taking notes. The MPs started sorting out who needed medical attention and who needed restraints. Flynn, conscious but dazed, looked up at Adrienne from the floor. "What are you?" She crouched down so they were eye level. "Lieutenant Commander Adrienne Cole, United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare Command, 3 combat deployments, Silver Star recipient, currently on medical reassignment pending disability evaluation." She stood back up, adjusting her plate carrier. "I tried to avoid this. Changed my schedule, worked alone, gave you every chance to leave me alone. But you decided quiet meant weak. She looked around at all of them. You burned my uniform because you thought I was pretending to be something I'm not. But the only people pretending in this whole mess were you. The commander stepped aside as the MPs began making their arrests. Cole, he said quietly. She turned. You ever think about coming back to instructor duty? Her voice was flat as steel. No, sir, but thanks for asking. As they led the 5 men away, 3 in handcuffs, 2 on stretchers, Adriana walked back toward the main supply building. Just another day at the office, except now everyone knew exactly who they were dealing with. By afternoon, the base had processed 5 disciplinary cases with stunning efficiency. Flynn was headed for medical discharge. His orbital socket required surgery, and the psych eval showed he was unsuitable for continued military service. Too aggressive, too unstable, too likely to repeat the behavior. Ballard's dislocated shoulder would heal, but he was being transferred to non-combat logistics. No more chances to play soldier. Rusk faced assault charges as a civilian contractor. His security clearance was already suspended, his access badge deactivated. He'd be escorted off base by evening. JT and Carver got administrative separations. Not quite dishonorable discharges, but close enough to follow them for the rest of their lives. None of them would ever wear a military uniform again. The investigation had been thorough but brief. Security audio from the equipment cage captured every threat, every attempt at intimidation, every criminal act. When combined with witness statements and Adrian's spotless record, the case was open and shut. But the real revelations came when Commander Reeves pulled the classified sections of her file. The JAG officer handling the case nearly choked on his coffee when he read the operational summaries. 3 combat deployments, 14 confirmed kills in direct action, 2 Purple Hearts, and Operation Tideglass, a hostage rescue in Somalia that had saved 11 civilians and extracted 3 wounded SEALs under heavy fire. Sir, the JAG said carefully, these men assaulted a Silver Star recipient, a decorated combat veteran with more operational experience than most of our current SEAL teams combined. Reeves nodded grimly. Gets better. Her medical evaluation isn't for disability retirement. It's to determine if she's fit to return to active combat status. The shrapnel in her back shifted during physical therapy. Doctors think it might have actually improved her mobility. The implications hit immediately. They hadn't just attacked a former operator. They'd attacked someone who might be returning to active SEAL teams within months. How do we handle this? The XO asked. Carefully, very carefully. Seknav's office has already called twice. This story cannot leave this base. But it was too late for that. Master Chief Rodriguez had been quietly spreading word through the senior enlisted network. Not gossip, context, making sure the right people understood exactly who they were dealing with. By evening, even the Marine Security Detachment knew the score. Their Sergeant Major had served with SEAL Team 2 during joint operations in Afghanistan. He remembered hearing about a female operator who'd earned a Navy Cross for actions under fire. Now she was inspecting their supply inventories. Honestly, the base XO told Commander Reeves, they're lucky she didn't kill one of them. Reeves was reading through Adrian's file again, the classified sections this time, the parts that explained exactly who they'd been dealing with. Operation Tideglass, Somalia hostage rescue. 11 civilians saved, 3 SEALs extracted under fire. Silver Star awarded for extraordinary heroism. 2 Purple Hearts for injuries sustained in combat. More confirmed kills than most infantry platoons saw in entire deployments. She held back, he said finally. Professional restraint under extreme provocation. The XO nodded. What happens now? Now we learn from this. New protocol for medical reassignments. Anyone with a combat's background gets proper recognition from day one. And mandatory training for all personnel about respecting service members, regardless of their current status. He closed the file. But mostly, we remember that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. and that respect should be given freely, not earned through violence. The reforms took effect immediately. The story spread through the base like wildfire, then beyond, a cautionary tale about assumptions and consequences. As for Adrienne Cole, she declined the offer to transfer out, stayed exactly where she was, auditing supplies and maintaining equipment with the same quiet professionalism she'd always shown. The difference was nobody questioned her uniform anymore. Nobody whispered about stolen valor. Nobody mistook her silence for weakness. She'd asked for nothing but the right to serve with dignity. And in the end, that's exactly what she got. Have you ever watched someone get completely underestimated just because they kept quiet about their past? Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who never feel the need to prove it. What do you think about how this played out? Did those 5 deserve what they got? Or should the consequences have been even harsher? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story reminded you that real strength doesn't need to announce itself, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about quiet warriors and hidden heroes. Share this with someone who knows that the most dangerous person in the room is usually the one saying the least. Your next Legacy Valor story is waiting on screen right now. Click it, and I'll see you tomorrow with another tale of respect earned the hard way. Thanks for watching.